Hello there, and now that GP Buenos Aires is over, we're going to be looking back at some of the decks and cards and trends of the tournament. First of all, let's look at the league decks going into the GP.
Yeah, so there was a lot of league games played for the GP, and quite a few of the decks that went 4-1 and better in league did show up at the GP. Florence being a bit of an oddball there because saw a disproportionate amount of league play and then didn't show up at the GP basically at all.
Yeah, I guess Florence is a good card, but there wasn't any Florence decks because Florence does require a sort of specific deck to run.
Yeah, Florence does require a lot of 1-drops. The decks I was playing with him were sitting at like 14 or so, which is a big commitment. It's probably also a good thing that people weren't running Florence decks because it ended up that a lot of the removal ended up changing over this GP, where a lot of the older removal that doesn't hit Florence very well, so Pith, Wilt, Scorch, that kind of stuff, didn't see a ton of play, and instead people kind of switched to answers that non-appropriately dealt with the current threats, particularly Rini, as well as Runebrawler. So going down the rest of the list of league decks quickly, you have Nhasia/Tunu Red, bit of an updated Nhasia Red deck, a bit different, but the same. Infuse came back with a vengeance. Obviously, Infuse kind of went dormant for a few months after last passage, and Crystal Conjuration got banned/nerfed.
Well, it's not even super dormant because Infuse did get a top 8 last GP.
Oh, that is true, yes.
But it was on the Grape Shot version, and I'm pretty sure Insert Name lost one of the top 8 matches because they drew 4 copies of Grape Shot.
Oh, yeah. Insert Name drew all 4 Unleashes, and it was very sad. But Infuse kind of got a bit of an update, not on League, but going into the GP with definitely Rini as a big one, as well as Restad's Command as kind of a much easier kill. I'm not sure if it killing that many places that Unleash wouldn't let you, but it does make it definitely a lot simpler at the very least. And now we get into kind of the big 2 styles of decks that the wildcards added with Rini and Valdez. Rini saw 6 decks this GP among 3 archetypes, which is a huge percent of the field, like 20% or something. Blue-White Rini being the deck that saw quite a bit of league play, you being the person that was running it.
5-0 and then a 4-1 after that with a slightly changed sideboard.
So there's 3 people on that deck in the GP, kind of a bit expected. So Blue-White Rini, as a deck, severely underperformed compared to what people were expecting.
Yeah, and I remember like going to GP and in the first few rounds of GP, people were saying that the Blue-White Rini deck is really busted. Like, it's because like the play pattern, if Rini gets a good draw against you, is just, or feels really unfair because you can't do anything, and they get a Rini on 2 mana with counter backup, and then you're just screwed.
Yeah, I'd say maybe even goes beyond feeling unfair, where it just kind of is unfair with Rini draws like sinkholes and ops and whatnot, and just counters your first couple plays and plays a Rini with counter spells. You're just kind of hoops no matter what deck you're on. But what ended up happening in the GP was very different than what was expected, with I think the Rini decks ended like 3-9 or something.
I'm actually not sure why they performed so poorly. It's either variance or operator error because the deck doesn't seem that bad. It seems really powerful when I was playing it in League and even against other decks playing testing.
Yeah, and you were even considering playing it for the GP until you decided to run back Rejuv, which ended up working out for you.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure either. I think part of it is probably just that the counterspell suite can be kind of played around because there's not really that many great generic counters that you want to be playing in MSEM, where Sinkhole is obviously kind of exceptional in every regard. But if you can't play like Portal Fracture, Portal Fracture isn't really in deck, then you have to play these very conditional counters with Cursory Glance and Still the Pandemonium. And those cards can kind of be played around with cards like Infectious Ego not being hit. Not that Infectious Ego was a big deal this GP. Valdez being another 4-drop that isn't hit. But you can kind of get around Blue-White Rini that way.
I mean, it's also not a super easy deck to play because sometimes you're better off just holding up your counter spells instead of playing your cantrips.
Yeah, I think there's definitely kind of that aspect where it is kind of important knowing what your opponent can play. Also, Patient Optimizer can kind of lead you into these bad play patterns.
Yeah, because sometimes you don't actually want to use your sorcery speed cantrips, Patient Optimizers, instead of holding up counters.
And I mean, the deck can definitely be improved. One of the cards I realized later on probably should have been in Blue-White Rini is like Mana Corruption as kind of a more generalized counterspell.
Yeah, but moving on to the actually good Rini decks this GP.
There were 6 Rini decks going into the GP. The 3 Blue-White Rini decks did very poorly. The other 3 Rini decks were 2 players on Infuse and 1 player on Abzan Rini. All 3 of those decks top-8'd, which is certainly a commendation for Rini as a card, at least. Now, the Rini deck I think people are expecting to see take down the GP, especially after both of them top-8'd, is Infuse.
In fact, if you look at the predictions in the top 8 profile, everyone says that Infuse is going to win, including myself.
Yeah, so that's a pretty telling sign that people think Infuse is pretty strong, whether everyone in the top 8 thinks that Infuse is going to win. I think there's some claims that it's going to be an incredibly high chance that there's going to be an Infuse finals.
I mean, an Infuse mirror match in the finals would have been really funny. It might not be fun, but it would be pretty funny.
You have a better match to hear about than actually watch. So both Infuse decks, however, got knocked out in the quarterfinals in very unexpected fashion.
Yeah.
One of them was to you.
Yeah, they didn't get any combo pieces in the top half of their deck in game 1.
Which is very, very unlikely to occur. Yeah. And then Ricky managed to put it away with 100 life or so.
Realms Overturning and then double Fulfill Twisted Dreams for 90 birds and 90 life.
And then game 2, bit of a better showing from Infuse, but Ricky drew double Forbidden Treasure and Infuse drew pretty mediocre kind of hands. Only drawing 1 Infuse in the top 25, only finding 1 discard spell and no interaction, that kind of stuff. And like that does kind of remind you that Infuse is a combo deck. It can just lose to itself in a way that like mid-range decks can't really.
Mid-range decks can get mana screwed.
Yeah, but like Infuse can also get mana screwed, right? Throwing 0-1s. But if you don't draw those critical pieces, your deck just straight up doesn't function. Whereas with aggro or mid-range or control, you just have so much redundancy that it doesn't really matter what you draw. So the other Infuse deck lost to Abzan Rini, which was powered by Homeward Travel. And that was much more expected, I think, than Rejuvenation beating out Infuse. I personally put my bets on Homeward Travel to win the GP, in a large part because they had so many sideboard cards for Infuse. I think they had like 10 sideboard cards for Infuse.
I mean, their sideboard cards are also good against Rejuvenation.
Yeah, that's true. And the matchup between Abzan Rini and Infuse was very close. I don't see all of it, but seemed to be very tight games all the way through, where it kind of came down to these kind of individual decisions that may or may not matter. How do you draw? Do you play mill spells to enable Muck Bruiser? Those kind of questions. Very minute decisions.
The Infuse deck did have a chance to win in those games because there were definitely decision points that could have turned the match.
Yeah, I remember in game 3, I wasn't like fully calculating all these lines. But I think basically every turn on both players' turns, I was like looking at the lines they're doing and thinking that those weren't the lines that I would do. Not saying that they were wrong. I'm definitely not super experienced in either deck. But a lot of them felt slightly different than my intuition would play.
Yeah.
So Abzan Rini is also one of the Valdez decks in the GP. Ended up facing the other Valdez deck that top-8'd. We did with 3 Valdez decks in total, 2 of them top-8ing, and blue-red attrition and black-red attrition. And Valdez plus Rini beat Valdez, and then eventually got to a Rejuvenation finals with Burn and Tropic Thunder being the other 2 top-8 decks that didn't end up making it to finals.
Honestly, I feel like the Burn matchup was the closest match because the actual finals against Rini, they just got stuck on lands.
Yeah, so just going through the rest of the matches, Tropic Thunder versus Burn. Tropic Thunder had very poor land draws. I think the game was over in like 10 minutes, or the match was over in 10 minutes or so, just based on that. Rejuvenation versus Burn, very close match, but Logger Recluse edged out game 3 in dramatic fashion.
If my opponent top decked the Burn spell there, I would have lost. I could have like had a better chance if I attacked my Logger Recluse that one turn, but better lucky than good.
Always can get bailed out by being lucky. And then finals, we have Abzan Rini, Rejuvenation, and then both games, Abzan Rini ends up mana screwed. Not super heavily, but kind of bad enough that it matters.
Yeah.
And I do kind of want to talk about Homage Tribal's specific list. I think it's kind of an interesting deck where a lot of things are going on that I'm not sure if they're good, if they're bad, if the deck's being carried by these individual strong cards, if the deck's a work of genius. No idea. But definitely one of the kind of concerns one might have with the deck list is that there's only 20 lands, not that many cantrips.
Well, at least their curve is sort of low.
Yeah, definitely a very low curve, topping out at 2 mana. I mean, some asterisks there with Endless Helpless Souls, Rini, and Valdez, but we saw a lot of time Homeland Tribal just kind of getting mana screwed, even if not in kind of big ways, being stuck on 2 lands or something like that.
Or just not having the right colors.
Yeah, just kind of in these subtle ways where they don't have double white for Rini, or they draw a tap land at the wrong time, or with like these check lands, not having the right basic for them. Additionally, the deck is kind of a bit weird because a lot of these cards just don't have that much synergy together. Well, at least at first glance.
They even have anti-synergy.
Yeah, so Dark Predictions. In this deck, the tether just kind of seemed like flavor text most of the time. Endless Helpless Souls, hitting Find Happiness and Misery, or Dark Predictions doesn't work with late motif or tether. Additionally, with Endless Helpless Souls, Rini and Valdez are not able to be hit.
Yeah.
It kind of like breaks all these deck building conventions that you kind of want with Endless Helpless Souls. And Valdez doesn't seem to work with the deck because it doesn't put cards in graveyard for Muck Bruiser or Rini, and it's not hit with EHS as mentioned previously. And there's all these kind of things, but it seemed like that none of that stuff actually mattered.
Maybe the Rini discard package is just really powerful. I think, this is the only Rini deck that also comboed it with discard. I mean, the Infuse deck also did, but not as much, or didn't rely on it as much, because they can also just cantrip.
Infuse is a bit different. But yeah, definitely. Just kind of playing 11 main deck discard spells with the Valdez, Prying Cry, Stolen Sequence might just be exactly what you want to be doing with Rini. It doesn't matter that you have these kind of cards that are anti-synergistic. And that's not saying, of course, the deck isn't entirely anti-synergistic. I mean, Find Happiness and Misery, great combo with Rini. Works exceptional with Muck Bruiser. And then there's just a lot of smart choices with removal. For Journey's End, as I kind of mentioned with Florence, you don't really want to be on that many Pithwelts this GP.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the threats just aren't hit by it. And then really Sideboard is also just very well put together, with a lot of Grave Hate, very well suited for this tournament. Having Sigil Radiance. This is a tech that Blue-White Rini also plays, where not only is Sigil Radiance Grave Hate, but it also protects the spells in your yard for Rini, as well as Muck Bruiser. And then just Noxious Upswelling being one of the few kind of cheap, clean answers to Rini. Definitely, I think, if you want to be playing kind of fair Rini deck.
Quote-unquote fair Rini.
Yeah, fair Rini. You probably want to be building off this style list. Maybe not making the same choices, necessarily. I'm not entirely convinced that you want Endless Helpless Souls in this list. Maybe there's some free drops that you might want to play instead. Maybe you want to play some more lands. Maybe you want to play some more cantrips or something. Not sure. But I think this definitely stands out as kind of the build that Rini wants to be on, instead of a more traditional counterspell Tempo Wish, like in Blue-White Rini.
Technically, you can also try to splash counterspells into whatever Rini deck you're running. Like maybe Esper Rini with discard and counters.
Maybe. I would say that if you look in this deck, you might also just want to be straight white-black. Because really, playing such a low amount of lands and being 3 colors kind of stretches your mana base kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like that's one of the reasons that blue-white Rini is blue-white instead of playing whatever third color. That's also in kind of canon magic why like you have blue-white Delver or blue-white Delver, not necessarily more and more colors of Delver, especially in standard.
Yeah, if you go back to Legacy, but that has a really good mana base. So, and speaking of things that don't actually matter, since Rini is probably going to get nerfed next month, Rini decks probably are not going to be as strong if they exist at all, depending on how they get nerfed.
I mean, easiest thing to do would just be a mana cost nerf if anything happens to Rini.
Well, I mean, the third white pip would kill blue-white Rini.
Yeah, probably. Or maybe the pound toughness goes down as well. All these things could happen. That kind of really depends on how you want to be building Rini. Because obviously, if Rini gets a third white pip, then, well, I don't think you want to be in 3 colors at all. Because these swamps and forests are not casting triple white spell. So I think we've probably spent enough time talking on this list in particular. Actually, Valdez is probably a good mention here. Valdez will probably come up again, but I think in this deck it's kind of especially interesting because it kind of highlights how powerful Valdez as a card is, where we mentioned kind of the anti-synergy. But every game I saw this deck play, Valdez is just a really good card. Pinch Pennies obviously is good. With this much discard, you don't really care about it not being the best discard spell in the world. And then just a 5/3 Haste Menace surprisingly wins a lot of games in Eternity. Forces trades, that kind of stuff. So the deck that ended up winning the GP, powered by Ricky, other person I'm talking to.
Rejuvenationless Rejuvenation Mark II. And it's Mark II because it runs Untouched Wilds.
Yeah, so Ricky played this deck last GP as well. The main difference being 4 Untouched Wilds in and 4 Explore out. Otherwise, it's mostly the same beyond Off-World Surveyors as the 1 mana ramp option.
Off-World Surveyors, it's the worst card in the deck, but there's no better options, so I'm forced to run these guys.
So just to kind of clarify, the reason why Off-World Surveyors is so important, same with the Log Recluse, where you kind of need a specific type of ramp, is because you want to play Untouched Wilds on turn 2, where you go fetch land, forest, play one of these 1-drop Accelerants that put lands into play, then turn 2, 3 lands, hopefully all of them being fetch lands or shifting lands, cast Untouched Wilds, have all these lands on play on turn 2, and then turn 3 you have 7 mana to do whatever the hell you want.
Yep. And feels absolutely broken when you manage to pull it off.
So, how did you feel about Untouched Wilds?
It's a really good card in this deck. It lets the deck go off super hard.
So, was it overkill, or did you actually find that you were needing this amount of power?
I don't think it was overkill. Even if you only return 2 lands with Untouched Wilds, it's still 3 mana ramp 2, which is still extremely good. Ekans got nerfed because it could ramp 2 mana with 3 mana.
Yeah, definitely part of the reason why the original version back in the day was a bit concerning. So, how good do you think Rejuveless Rejuv is?
I think it's probably best land vomit style deck currently, because an early Children of the Clouds is probably the best thing to ramp into because it gives you a huge board. It also gives you a really fast clock, and it gains you life to stabilize. So even if you're like on the back foot, Children can easily turn the game around. Previously, before Rejuvenation was nerfed, the actual Rejuvenation deck ran Cosmic Coalescing, but if you weren't killing your opponent with the Cosmic Coalescing, you weren't really doing much. With Children's, you can you don't have to kill your opponent right away. You can just play a big Children's and then win the game from there.
Yeah, definitely one of the things about Rejuvenation in general is that the deck kind of leans into this kind of ramp control style deck at times, where the main kind of combo of Realms of Eternity and Rejuvenation or Fulfill Twisted Dreams, making 30, 40, 50, whatever amount of mana, is obviously game winning. But the deck can also just get to 7 mana or whatever, play some coalesce cards, and just kind of outvalue the opponent with 5/6s that have drawn them 4 cards or whatever.
Yeah.
Where even like the original builds of Rejuvenation just had some Leyrams alphas in them. And these were the original builds. Rejuvenationless Rejuvenation kind of leans into that a fair bit with Children of Clouds, as you mentioned, being able to do that. End of All Things as kind of interactive piece that you only have one copy of main, but you have more sideboard, you have 4 card realities to fetch for them.
Yep.
You have some life gain, main deck with a flawless world, and you can kind of lean more heavily into the ramp control value kind of style of deck.
Even if it doesn't really look like it has that much interaction, it somehow still manages to do reasonably well against combo decks, just because sometimes you just get 7 mana on turn 3 and then win from there.
Definitely a lot of the combo decks in this format are kind of a bit on the slower side, so you can just kind of get set up with all your mana before you die to the combo. Though Infuse being quite a bit on the faster side. And also just one last thing on End of All Things, where End of All Things does see play kind of in these control-y style decks, just as kind of catch-all answer. But one of the big things in Rejuvenation is that you can coalesce it really early, which seems to come up quite a bit, getting a chance at 2 of your opponent's permanents by like turn 5 or whatever, as opposed to just 1 in kind of traditional control ramp style builds. So moving forward, we have another Untouched Wilds build, which was the build kind of what was on. And now this is kind of going outside the top 8 and talking about more specific decks in the GP, regardless of how they performed. So you have another Logger Recluse, Off-World Surveyors, Untouched Wild kind of decks. But this deck is red-green as opposed to ban, and kind of plays a bit differently than Rejuvenation. Definitely sees a lot more cards as one thing with Sighing of Cloudies and Shifting Lands, and being able to turn cards. You have kind of weaker but alternate form of mana doubler in Tunu. So this deck did not do very well in GP. It went 0-2, though I did watch the games and they seem pretty competitive at the very least. I do want to kind of talk about this deck as kind of the flip side of Untouched Wilds, where this style of deck does exist. I don't know if this is necessarily going to end up being the best style of build, but playing Untouched Wilds as a proactive card instead of a combo card or a control deck card, as in Rejuvenation, I think has real potential. I think I've actually seen a couple of decks floating around in the league that are on Untouched Wilds. I think Untouched Wilds Rock and Roll was what they were doing. Playing Logger Recluse, then Untouched Wilds, and Rock and Roll is 7 3/3s on turn 3, which is pretty good.
It's more power and toughness than birds.
That's very true. Definitely there's a lot of stuff you can do with Untouched Wilds that feels ridiculously unfair. This deck in particular I think it's reasonable. I think chances are it does need a couple improvements somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where those improvements come from. Maybe Cosmic Coalescing, maybe Confirmed Hypothesis.
It does have a problem with where it just runs out of cards sometimes.
In some ways, it's kind of designed to run out of cards.
With Adaroth.
Yeah, Adaroth kind of being a kill condition almost, where that's your kind of combo kill in this non-combo deck. Where if you just have 20 mana from you untapping with 10 lands and 2 new, Adaroth does just kill your opponent.
Yeah.
I figured I'd make a point to bring up Untouched Wilds as kind of an alternate style deck.
Or Untouched Wilds plus Logger Recluse, Land Vomit.
Land Vomit as a more expansive archetype than just Rejuvenation. So moving on, we have Temur Runebrawler.
We actually have 2 people on Temur Runebrawler this GP. Amakino running an updated version with more blue 2-mana spells for Cane Dancer now that confirmed self-exiles. And then Mexican Mafia running the old version. Or not the old version, but like the version that I was keeping around for testing.
Oh, okay. It wasn't even Amakino's version.
Yeah, because it has shell drains in the sideboard.
Oh, okay, yeah. It's that version, not making any sense to any viewers. But yeah, so Temur Runebrawler, one last GP. Pretty comfortably even. I felt Runebrawler's deck just plays very fair magic all the way through. Or fair as this kind of style that can be. And it did not perform that well this GP.
Well, for Mexican Mafia, I think it's because they're just sort of new to the format. They approached me one day before a GP, and then I just gave them this deck. I think they had fun playing this deck, so I'm pretty happy with that.
I think part of Runebrawler not kind of performing quite as well is just that Runebrawler doesn't really get any cards from the new sets, so other decks kind of got a buff. Runebrawler kind of staying the same.
Almakeel's running up Scoria in the sideboard.
The score, it's pretty minor. I mean, Confirm Hypothesis Exile itself isn't that big of a deal.
It did matter in that one game against Crazy Train.
Oh yeah, that's true. Though that was kind of a special case. But still a good deck, very stable. Think will exist for a long time to come, but not tip-top in the meta as it once was.
Which is a disappointing thing, because now I won't be able to pull out my Confirm Bingo as often.
Yeah, definitely Confirm Hypothesis. Fell a bit off a cliff. Card is still from normal. Card should be seeing way more play than it is currently. But at the same time, a lot of people just aren't playing the decks that Confirm would be good in. A lot of mid-range blue decks in this GP. With the exception of blue-white walkers, which I want to talk about briefly. So, Chumbeak / Shoop Thrower was on this blue-white walker deck, which is very interesting. Didn't top 8, formed okay. And I kind of want to point this deck out because the build was a bit peculiar. There's kind of some very questionable looks at these Children in the Clouds and Gaze Deeper, where they're kind of very hard to enable, as well as playing 16 4-drops and whatnot. And just show the gate, I would like to point out that Confirm would be absolutely phenomenal in this deck. This is poster child of a Confirm Hypothesis deck.
I guess with shifting lands.
Yeah, with shifting lands, of course. They're playing real lines for ramp to 4 mana, confirm ramps, and draws your card, and also copies or activate abilities, where all these planeswalkers can be confirmed. And hell, a card like Hemley Eggfeather is basically an activated ability masquerading as a spell. This deck is pretty notable, probably because I don't personally think the build is that great, especially like Children and Gaze Deeper being kind of questionable. Same with like maxing out on all these 4-drops. We saw some kind of funny games where they had like 5 4-drops in hand and 3 lands.
Yeah.
But Blue-White Walkers as kind of a deck idea, I think, is very solid in general, with the printing of Ico in particular, as well as Bodden's Channel. I think Ico's kind of a bigger deal. So kind of brief on the deck. You play Bodden's Channel, you play Headwind. Headwind enters the battlefield with 4 loyalty, so you can -3. Hopefully that shuts down your opponent. Then you play Ico, +1 on Headwind, and then pay the 1 mana, put Headwind back into play, -3 again, and repeat. And eventually win through whatever means.
You can also use Avenge to blink Headwind.
So Ico, I think, is the big card that makes this kind of style of deck work. Where Ico kind of does everything for this deck. The +1 combos with Headwind, which is also kind of a nice removal piece against tokens, and as well as resetting stuff like Hemley Eggfeather. -3, very good removal in a creatureless deck. Battle for Blood, good card. And then the emblem, especially with Bodden's Channel, is reasonably easy to obtain. Very good against a wide variety of decks, especially locks down stuff like Bounty's Gardens or Children of the Clouds.
Wander lets Ico activate multiple times.
If you're Wander and Ico in play, +1 the Wanderer, +1 the Wanderer again, or whatever. Ico, +1 the Wanderer, pay 1 to put Wanderer back in play, use Wanderer, then use the extra ability on Ico to +1 the Wanderer again. And that gains a ridiculous amount of life, often something like 15, 20 life with 4 or 5 mana, which is almost as good as winning the game in this kind of deck, or against certain kind of decks at least.
And you also get to scry a bunch, which matters slightly less, but you do get to dig towards a card.
And definitely in this kind of deck where you're not really too excited about drawing lands past the 4th or 5th, you're pretty happy about that scry. I don't think this deck needs necessarily that many adjustments to kind of be a contender. Cutting some of the 4-drops might be an idea. Playing Confirm Hypothesis, I think, is an excellent idea. Playing some removal over the Children in the Clouds, or Gaze Deeper, maybe some counter spells, some Cosmic Sinkholes or whatever. All kind of ideas. Additionally, one of the kind of neat things about this deck is it has kind of a relevant land suite. Risty Workshop, a new card. I see some play here. I'm not sure if it's the best in this deck, but it is kind of a very nice card. Kind of a mutavault type thing with kind of an alternate upside. Anzen working up with Swan Cohort is kind of a very nice thing. Anzen also kind of works with the Risty Workshops. and I'll kind of point this out in particular with this deck because it is 2 colors, so you can kind of more afford to play these utility lands.
If they're only running Risky Workshop as their colorless land.
Yeah, but I think 2 colorless lands is more than the 3 color decks, for example, can really afford to play. Maybe if people are building decks, they might want to consider cutting down a bit on their colors to play these kind of neat utility lands with Risky Workshop. And the last deck I want to talk about was Blue-Red Prowess, which I think Olga was playing. The big kind of new card that Blue-Red Prowess gets, kind of course, being kind of an old archetype in both kind of Magic and here, is Enrapture Counters, which is not only a Prowess creature, but it also gives you kind of a Snapcaster type effect. But it's also a sorcery, so it triggers all your Prowess stuff.
Yeah, it's 2 spells in a can. In
addition to being pretty reasonable 1-drop in this style of deck. And there's also some kind of neat innovations with Zem Enforcer and Strongarm being a very neat thing. Strongarm giving Trample being a very nice thing. Treasure Token being very nice as well. I don't think people have been playing Consultation Knowledge in this deck. This is kind of the deck that, beyond combo decks, really makes Consultation Knowledge kind of work. But especially with Strongarm, that's kind of a free spell. You can kind of vomit your hand and you'll just a ridiculous amount of damage. And I think this list in general just has a whole lot of potential.
That's something interesting that this deck is running is Massive Tranquility, which I actually haven't seen in a while, or really at all since I joined the format. I think it might be because it's a 2-drop, so it doesn't look as attractive to a fast deck, but it can do a lot of damage really quickly if your opponent doesn't have a way to block it.
It has a nice synergy with Strongarm. So you're talking about not wanting it to be blocked. Well, Strongarm doesn't care about blockers.
And in the sideboard, it's running Whistle Dragons, which is also a card that doesn't see much play.
Yeah, I will say I'm not entirely sold on sideboard. Imposition feels a bit cute. I'm not exactly sure. Do you know what Whistle Dragons is for?
I mean, I have to assume it's for maybe decks that only have sorcery speed removal or something. So maybe just as a last-ditch fireball sort of thing.
I think this deck could benefit from some more diverse and just kind of innately powerful type sideboard choices, some score yates maybe in some cosmic sinkholes. Maybe Imposition is good against combo, though I kind of have my doubts. So then, those are all the decks that I want to talk about. There are a few specific cards in a few random decks that I think are kind of exciting and should see some more play. Carnival Daredevil being one of them. The Flying Pinata played it in Burn. I don't know necessarily if it's good in Burn. I know they were kind of so-so on it, but I think this card has a lot of potential.
In my game against them, they did force me to use Betsy's Brood on their Carnival Daredevil because it flipped a spell that would have let them attack through.
Yeah, I think in that game it also drew them a land as well.
Yeah.
And really just a 1-mana 1/1 haste that draws you a card. And I was about to drop them 2 cards is already pretty exciting. The reason I say I don't think it's necessarily at the best in Burn is because often creatures are kind of just expendable. And just a 1-mana 1/1 that draws cards is not especially where you want to be in Burn.
And also the duet condition isn't like completely free because sometimes you actually have to hold back stuff in order to enable it.
Yeah. So I do think the card is very exceptional. Maybe exceptional, maybe going a bit far, but I think you can kind of build around this card properly in kind of a blue-red Delver-esque way. Play not too many creatures and just kind of push through with cheap spells and kind of being more efficient. So in this case, your cheap creature kind of also draws cards. I don't know if that's necessarily what Ragavan is doing in Modern nowadays, but
I mean, I think Ragavan just does everything.
That's true. This does have haste, which Ragavan doesn't have for 1 mana. At the very least.
Yeah.
There's also some kind of cute things that you can do with Carnival Daredevil with, say, Dragon Wall Gates, where you can kind of trigger the duet condition without attacking. And also the duet condition, you can attack with creatures, and then if you've hit instants, you can cast them before blocks. So if you can manage to build your deck around instant speed interaction, that could be very exceptional. Doesn't necessarily work too well in Burn, because a lot of the Burn is sorcery speed. Also with the updated new Panya, that works exceptionally well with Carnival Devil, where the creature side gives both them flying, the Venture being an instant interaction spell that you can cast off Duet. That's really good to hit off Duet. I guess we can talk about Tenuous Existence as well.
So I want to bring up this card, not specifically because I'm also the one that made it, but it's weird because this card's been doing a lot more than I expected to do when I first designed it. Basically, like the card's a lot more versatile than I expected it to be. And like in my game against Flying Piranha, they used Tenuous Existence to clear out a blocker. And then they also made a really funny play where, as my Betsy's Brood was coming down from Tenuous Existence, they Tenuous Existence their other creature so that Betsy's Brood had to kill itself.
Yeah, so and maybe that's a specific kind of scenario, but even just more generally, it is a momentary blink that has a flashback of 2 instead of 4. Slow flicker instead of fast flicker. Say that 10 times fast. But it does protect your creatures against removal. Obviously, the base cost to like 4 mana, exile the creature when it comes back in is a bit tame. But the card definitely has a lot of use cases that aren't necessarily obvious. I mean, the reason that Flying Pinata had it in against you was because it hits all the birds. And not only does it kill all the birds once, but it kills all the birds twice.
And if they have 2 Tenuous Existences, they can use it to kill the birds and then also kill one of my creatures.
Yeah, it does definitely work fair on multiples, which makes sense because it has flashback. It's intended to work well on itself.
I mean, it works extremely well on multiples because you only have to do the second mode once, and then you can just do the first mode any number of times. And like sometimes you can Tenuous Existence using the second mode to kill a token that's coming in, and then you use the first mode on a creature that already exists, and you're just exiling a creature for free.
Yeah, very high value card. We haven't really seen it that much in main decks. I think it's mainly when it's seen play, especially when it first came out in that kind of first week. It saw a lot of sideboard play, kind of intended to be played against Bounty Gardens, that kind of token maker kind of style deck.
It stops Florence, which was the main thing I used it for when I was playing Blue-White Rini in League.
Yeah, but I definitely think it'd be interesting to see whether there's a deck that can like main deck Tenuous Existence, which can make use of slow flickering your own creatures. Moving on to some other cards which are kind of starting to see play this GP. We have Intrepid Captain. And Intrepid Captain is kind of at base a stronger Rabble Master, almost, from Carnival, where instead of buffing itself, buffs all the things it makes. Additionally, it doesn't force you the things it makes to attack every combat, just the first combat. And the last thing is that it stacks really well with itself, which kind of surprised me when I was using it in Jade Temple kind of style decks. I'll also mention that both of the sets coming out next month have Pirate Tribal in them, and Intrepid Captain happens to be a good, solid card that happens to buff pirates.
It also makes pirates.
Yeah, so wink, wink, nudge, nudge, play Pirate Tribal. Pirate Tribal is good, probably. Definitely a card I think that these kind of mid-range reg decks should be considering, particularly if you can't play the kind of staple red 3 drops of MSEM Antiquity and Capacious Trappler.
Meanwhile, while in Wizardian's deck, it also runs Infectious Ego. I think its most powerful mode is a 4-mana land destruction tool, where if you can get it down on turn 3 and your opponent doesn't have anything except lands, they're forced to sack a land, and then if they can't deal with it right away, they pretty much lose because they're sacking a land each turn after that.
Infectious Ego, definitely a very strong card. I'm doing a lot of League play.
Yeah.
In various styles of decks, whether that's playing on turn 4, completely fair, trying to play on turn 2 through some degenerate means, whether that's rituals or mana base or whatever.
Yeah.
None of that's at play here. Vizanius is just playing it on turn 4, hoping the opponent sacks important stuff to it. Good 4/4 lifelinker. But despite being talked about a lot, definitely not seeing that much play in the GPs.
It seems like Wizardians is the only person on Infectious Ego this GP.
Yeah, I'm very surprised that the Dream Sight list isn't playing it, since Infectious Ego seems like a very good Dream Sight card. It's just always kind of at least decent. And there's also Mausoleum Resident. So I was on Big the Cat.
Big the Cat.
the cat big, and also because it's a Sonic character. But kind of this, I'll call it Dredge Cat because that's easier to say, where you're playing around Mausoleum Resident. So the deck in particular I was on is not the most exceptional. I think it's probably missing a card to really kind of get its feet under it. Definitely once it gets going, it gets going pretty hard, but that's at the cost of playing very little interaction and being a bit on the weak side to graveyard hate. But Mausoleum Resident, in particular, I think is a very, very interesting card and should see a lot more builds than it's currently seeing. At the moment, this is, I think, the only Mausoleum Resident deck that's seen any play. Because the card is just very good. Even if you only get 1 or 2 counters on it, it's a 1 mana 2/3 or 3/4 menace that also has lifelink at times. So shows up your life total, good blocker, has evasion. What more can you really want? You definitely don't need to go all in on it, like Big the Cat is doing, and Dredge Cat are designed to do. So even just playing something like Raid the Forgotten Tomb. You can also exile creature cards from your graveyard. So Suruchi Flamebinder triggers it. If your opponent exiles your graveyard, Mausoleum Resident's probably getting a counter. So it can kind of just grow pretty quickly for not that much of a cost. Obviously, it does take a fair number of ways to grow. I'd say probably at least 10 as kind of a rough ballpark. But I think the card is just very solid, and there's probably a really good build out there.
And I think that's all the cards that we wanted to talk about. For the next GP, well, I mean, we can't really say much for the next GP because new cards are going to be coming out, and we don't know what the nerfs are going to be. I mean, we're pretty sure that Infuse and Rini are going to be hit pretty hard, so those decks will be out of the meta, and then...
Yeah, you're definitely less pressed for base-specific early answers, because you do really kind of need an answer to turn 3 or turn 4 Rini against these decks, because if you don't, you just kind of lose. And a 3/4 is not that easy to deal with. Fuse, same kind of story. Very specifically, you need a very specific subset of graveyard hate. Mass graveyard hate is really what you want. Seal the Tomb is really what you want. So Sacrificial Bull is probably going to be see more play if Infuses and if whatever. There's a lot of talk about Valdez being really strong. I've personally been really impressed with how strong Valdez is with GP. We're consistently just outperforming expectations.
Yeah. I think after Rini gets nerfed, Valdez might just be the best card in MSC.
Yeah, that's possible. Actually, well, from what we know now, that's probably just kind of true. It seems pretty safe to say that of the new cards, Valdez is the most impactful outside of Rini. But the Valdez decks, just in general, as like black decks with a lot of discard, obviously that's a huge archetype. And Valdez continues being this kind of very powerful card, which I have to imagine it will continue being. I have to imagine that people find the Valdez build that has all the answers and all the questions. Like Scribble's List. We didn't really talk about Scribble's List, but they made top 4 using 2 Abzan Rini. And they make great use of Valdez, where the discard triggering Ambitious Necromancer makes good use of the pressure from Valdez, in addition to like Basic Rebirth as a new card, and just very highly synergistic, and kind of all of it kind of being melded together by Valdez's interaction and targeting. So you don't need to cut threats to make Ambitious Necromancer work. So yeah, I'd say that Valdez kind of decks stand at me as future top contenders.
Yeah. So for next GP, what decks are you looking to build? Or I guess once the new sets come out, what decks are you looking to build? Because you did mention pirates and dragons and a lantern.
Oh my. Yeah, so I don't want to spoil too much. I mean, I haven't. I built the decks and they're all broken. And yes, Dragon Dog is the best card in the format. Don't ask me why. Maybe you will see it, maybe you won't. But it's the best card in the format. Pirates seem like a deck that could be very viable. Obviously, there's a high bar for aggro decks to clear, because playing just random creatures doesn't often get you there. There's a lot of other kind of random stuff. There's a few pieces for like equipment style of decks. The new Panya is pretty exciting for like modal style decks.
Or maybe just like temple decks in general, right?
Yeah, maybe. I need to see the new Panya in action to kind of take a stance on it. definitely there's a lot of interesting cards in both Honora and Over the Horizons.
Actually, funnily enough, the set that Valdez comes from is also coming to the format, so I guess you won't be alone.
I don't think there's any adventure tribal kind of cards, but not that made super excellent. I remember at the very least for constructed sets.
There's no Lucky Clover in the set, unfortunately.
But potentially you could make use of all the new adventure cards and kind of build around those in a kind of tribal sense with like casting cards from Exile. There's a few cards that work with that. I think Almakino was looking at lists that kind of synergize around that, which gets helped by all these new adventure cards coming into the format. And just like in general, having adventure as kind of a 2-for-1 mechanic definitely kind of encourages these kind of decks that can make use of the creature side of the card or make use of the spell kind of card to kind of get these blends, kind of like Scribble's deck, where Ambitious Necromancer, you want spells and creatures, and the adventure cards kind of fulfill both those.
Right.
So I'd be interested to see if there's decks that can kind of make use of both sides of the adventure cards to the fullest.
For next GP, I think I'll run a deck that has Children of the Clouds because I want to show off the promo. It's just flaunt a bit, you know?
Yeah, show off a little bit. Turn 1, reveal the birds from your hand, intimidate your opponent.
So probably just Rejuvenation Mark 3. Hopefully there's some big improvements to the deck so that I can call it Mark 3.
Yeah, maybe there's stuff in the new set. Rejuvenation definitely kind of use a different style of card than a lot of the more traditional kind of builds that need to kind of play these 1 to 3 drops. Rejuvenation can play whatever the hell it wants, kind of. I guess speaking of promos, you also have Ophidian Oracle.
Oh yeah, right.
From 8-sack.
Right.
And Ophidian Oracle has all these kind of combos. 8-sack, showing off some of them with Abounding What Looks Beyond back in the pack. And it hasn't seen, I think, any play since 8-sack 1 GP. That was a few GPs ago at this point. And back in the pack, and What Looks Beyond has a good potential to come back if the correct creature is printed. Fire True Seeker being a big one for getting the deck to be where it is now, and that's just from Bakuba. And if we want the subject of GP promos, you have Idyllic Odyssey, and there's definitely been a fair amount to talk about Idyllic Odyssey, and its fall from grace, or whether it's playable or not.
It's still technically a 1-mana Berry Blossom. If you
yes,
try hard enough.
It definitely is. I mean, I promised that the top 3 decks in the format are Pirates, Dragons, and Lantern Control, and Idyllic Odyssey is key in one of those decks.
Yeah.
So maybe Idyllic Odyssey makes a return as well. Who knows? Maybe all 3 promo cards make a return just because they're so pretty and the artwork is so nice.
Yeah.
I think that's all we have to talk about.
Yeah. I think GP Buenos Aires had quite an interesting story. Going to GP, we thought that Infuse would win, but in the end, turns out that the winner is actually the slow combo deck that had absolutely no interaction against Infuse.
I think one of the few decks in the top 8 that didn't have any of the new fancy new cards, just use fancy old cards instead.
Yeah.
And Rini definitely failed in some aspects, succeeded in other aspects.
Probably won't ever see the same success now that it's going to get nerfed, but at least it had its day in the sun.
At the same time, Rini is the card that I think really needs tuning. The decks around Rini need a lot of tuning to be exactly where you want to be. I think getting the right Rini build might take some time, and even if Rini gets some nerfs to like the mana cost or the power and toughness, I think it's very possible a stronger, similarly strong Rini deck comes out of the woodwork in a couple of months, just because someone's found the build that works, where White has gotten a fancy new removal spell. Because at the moment, White does not really have that many good instant sorceries.
Yeah.
But that will be something that people will, I guess, that's not look forward to, because I don't think people really enjoy playing at Rini, but we'll have to dread for the future.
Yep.
In GP, C, and D, any